Hello everyone and welcome. Today, we delve into a critical issue that resonates globally: the succession of the Dalai Lama and China's assertive attempts to control this deeply spiritual process. This situation challenges religious freedom and international norms. Just recently, the Dalai Lama issued a clear public statement. He affirmed that the institution of the Dalai Lama will continue, and decisions regarding his succession rest solely with him and the Gaden Fodring Trust, based in Dharamshala, India. He emphasized that no government, including China, has the authority to influence this spiritual matter. In a powerful show of support, 34 members of the European Parliament from 15 EU countries recently published an op-ed in EU Observer. They urged China not to interfere in the selection of the next Dalai Lama. These MEPs represent a wide political spectrum, including S&D, EPP, Greens, the Left, and Renew Europe. The MEPs' initiative comes shortly after the Dalai Lama's statement. In their op-ed, they called for the EU to consider targeted sanctions against Chinese officials. These sanctions would target those responsible for violating the religious rights of Tibetans, including any individuals involved in attempts to control or manipulate the Dalai Lama's succession process. This is not a new stance for the European Parliament. It has consistently expressed opposition to Chinese interference in Tibetan religious affairs. Most recently, this was reiterated in its May 2025 resolution. The EU also raised the issue of succession during its most recent EU-China human rights dialogue. It called on China to respect Tibetan religious freedom and to refrain from imposing a successor. This Sunday, July 6th, the 14th Dalai Lama will celebrate his 90th birthday. This is a significant milestone for a spiritual leader whose message of peace and compassion has resonated far beyond Tibet's borders. He is truly a vital figure, not only for the Tibetan people, but also for the future of the world. He embodies principles of peace, reconciliation, and respect for human rights. In a world too often marked by division and aggression, the Dalai Lama's unwavering commitment to dialogue, mutual understanding, and respect for human dignity mirrors the very values upon which the European Union was founded. His consistent appeal for reconciliation, rather than revenge, has inspired thousands across faiths, ideologies, and generations. At this critical time, the Chinese government is seeking to assert full control over Tibetan Buddhism. This includes the deeply spiritual process of identifying the Dalai Lama's successor. The European Union must take a principled stand. We must speak with one voice to defend freedom of religion, human rights, and the right of the Tibetan Buddhist community to determine their own religious leaders free from state interference. China's attempts to control reincarnation are not merely symbolic. They are part of a calculated political strategy designed to legitimize its rule in Tibet and undermine Tibetan spiritual authority. As the Dalai Lama grows older, Beijing has been actively laying the groundwork to appoint its own successor. In response to the Dalai Lama's new book, Voice for the Voiceless, where he claims his successor will be born outside of China and the Tibetan freedom movement will continue after his death, China has asserted its stance. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson emphasized that the Dalai Lama's reincarnation must comply with national laws. They stated that the search should be domestic, using China's Golden Era method, and must be approved by the central government. This issue transcends Tibet. It serves as a crucial test of the international community's commitment to religious freedom. If we allow any government to impose a spiritual leader on a people against their will, we set a dangerous precedent with global implications. Already, several governments and parliaments have voiced their opposition to these interferences. Most recently, the Dutch House of Representatives passed a motion clearly stating that China has no legitimate role in the religious succession of the Dalai Lama. In June 2024, following the 39th EU-China Human Rights Dialogue, which included a field visit to the Tibet Autonomous Region, the EU reiterated its position. They stated that the selection of religious leaders should occur without any government interference and in respect of religious norms, including in the case of the Dalai Lama's succession. On May 8th of this year, the European Parliament adopted a resolution firmly opposing any attempt by the Chinese government to interfere in the selection of Tibetan Buddhist spiritual leaders, including the Dalai Lama. While these statements have sent an important signal, a stronger stance is now needed. The time has come for the European Union and its member states to make it unequivocally clear that they support the authority of the present Dalai Lama. He, as the head of the Tibetan Buddhist community, should decide on his reincarnation according to Tibetan religious tradition. Furthermore, any interference by the Chinese government in the Dalai Lama's succession must carry serious consequences. We call on the EU, on behalf of its 27 member states, to adopt a statement affirming this critical position. The EU must also clarify that any Chinese officials involved in such interference will be considered for a listing under the EU Global Human Rights Sanctions regime, also known as the European Magnitsky Act. Beyond sanctions, we urge the Chinese government to resume direct and meaningful dialogue with the representatives of the Dalai Lama. The 2008 Memorandum on Genuine Autonomy, presented by the Tibetan side, remains a viable basis for negotiation. Dialogue, not repression, is the only sustainable path to peace and stability in Tibet. The Dalai Lama is not an obstacle, but a solution to this long-frozen conflict. In 1988, the Dalai Lama addressed the European Parliament with a visionary 5-point peace plan. He called for Tibet to become a zone of peace, the protection of Tibetan culture and environment, and meaningful talks with Beijing to define Tibet's status and future relations with China. Crucially, he renounced the demand for full independence, advocating instead for genuine autonomy within the People's Republic of China, known as the Middle Way. This Middle Way remains a pragmatic and peaceful solution to the long-standing conflict. Yet, instead of seizing this opportunity, the Chinese Communist Party has responded with assimilation and repressive policies. These policies threaten the very survival of Tibetan culture and identity. Since 2010, China has unilaterally ended talks with the Dalai Lama's representatives, which started in 2002. During this period, Beijing has implemented aggressive policies in Tibet, including coercive boarding schools that forcibly separate Tibetan children from their families and culture. In December 2023, the European Parliament condemned this policy. These actions not only violate international law, but also form part of a broader strategy to erase Tibetan civilization. In 2011, the Dalai Lama transferred his political power to the democratically elected Central Tibetan Administration. However, he continues to be a powerful moral and spiritual guide for Tibetans in the world. As he nears his 90th birthday, we must protect his legacy of nonviolence, dialogue, and hope. For the EU to uphold its core values, it must support the Tibetan people, defend their religious freedom, and push China back to the negotiating table. Your support can help us continue to raise awareness and advocate for the protection of Tibetan religious freedom and human rights. Donations allow us to create impactful content and share vital information with a wider audience, ensuring that these critical issues remain in the global spotlight. Please consider contributing to our efforts to defend these fundamental rights.